Good morning, and it's a privilege to be here and to share time with leaders from communities right across Ireland and organisations working hard both in the community, non-state and state sector, and to some of our newly elected politicians who've also joined us today. It's lovely to see you here. I've also seen that you've had a little sneak preview of the presentation, so hopefully I haven't given too much away. So as Sharon was saying, the safety audit is our second audit, and what I want to do now is just kind of place it in the context of us taking stock. It is 2016, and if anything, the last few months have woken me up to the fact that I wasn't really educated about the right to have a life in Ireland as an equal citizen, as a woman. Somehow that was taken out of the curriculum when they were teaching me in the mid-80s and the early 90s, late 70s, all that time. Give enough away. And I think it's important for me as well, as I realise that I'm working half my life in this issue and I'm still a young woman, but it's only in the last few years that we're actually starting to see that there is more political leadership and people at senior levels in the key state agencies actually naming the issue and starting to begin to address it. So I think it's in that context that a lot of what I'm speaking about needs to be understood. So 2016, it's a year in which we can take stock of the state we're in, the way we treat people, and particularly the way we treat those who are most vulnerable and most in need of our support and help. Women and children living with violence and abuse in their homes are amongst the most vulnerable, most traumatised and the most stressed in our country. How we treat them, how we respond to them, and how we care for them is a mark of our communal humanity, of how we want to be measured as a nation, 100 years on from the aspirations of the great leaders, women and men. So, what do we know in 2016? Well, we know that 1 in every 3 women living in our country has experienced some form of severe psychological violence from an intimate partner since they were 15 years of age. We also know that 1 in 4 women have experienced some form of severe physical and or sexual violence from a male partner or non-partner since they were 15. When we consider the census figures, we're talking hundreds of thousands of women living in our country in 2016. Annually, we know that across our 40 member services throughout all the communities in Ireland, 12,500 women and children are accessing them for vital, critical supports on their journey to safety and a life free from violence. Annually, our members answer 50,000 helpline calls, the majority of which are from women or family and friends who are looking to support a loved one who is in a violent relationship. Sadly, what we also know is across our network of services, we had 4,831 requests for accommodation that we could not meet because we did not have the space to accommodate the women coming forward from violent situations. And what we also know is that of our population of women who are experiencing violence, that 79% who have experienced severe physical or sexual violence have never told anyone. It's important to understand that we don't have the full picture, and the data I talk about tells us about the women who've disclosed in the interviews, in the studies that have been carried, the levels of violence in their life. What we also don't know is, and what we need to find out more about in an Irish context, is the consequences for individuals, mainly women and children, and their families and their communities as a result of the violence that's perpetrated against them. These consequences are lifetime consequences if they're not addressed. We have no Irish study on the economic and social cost of domestic violence, and until we realise the absolute cost to society, when are we going to wake up to the importance of preventing and responding to this violence effectively. We have no national crime survey data in Ireland to draw on. We do not have a national attrition study on domestic violence, and therefore we don't understand all of the reasons for why women aren't getting to benefit from the resources that are in the justice system and why they're not getting the justice that they're telling us about. We are delighted that there's progress being made in justice system data, and I very much look forward next year to being able to access hopefully the new data in the Garda system, and that will be fed through hopefully the CSO, so it's publicly available. This is a very welcome development, and working with the Guards, we're delighted that these systems are in place, and we have to commend CUSC as well for the work they've been doing across the justice system to try to develop better systems for data. But there's a lot of work to do, and this is evident in the studies we've been trying to carry out. We cannot get answers to key questions. In health service data, we need to have a visibility of domestic violence in the health service. I was told, I haven't the exact reference, but I was told recently of a presentation in Cork by a social worker, and she had costed one single case of physical injury coming into A&E, and the cost of that one case of a woman coming in with physical injury was 60,000 to the health service. That would equate to 1.5 support workers that will be working with that woman in that community to help prevent violence or put an extra guard on the street or whatever. So we need to understand how we can prevent violence from occurring and how we prevent it occurring in the first place. And we need investment to do that. And in terms of homeless data, as you can hear in all of the reports, we do not have any naming or visibility of domestic violence in homeless data, and it is a crazy situation. And finally, what we don't know and we don't fully understand is the 79% of women. Why are they not coming forward? Why are they not disclosing to people? Why are they not seeking help? And we need to understand this if they need help. So what we're clear about is that the state that we live in 2016 is failing to take the opportunities that could help prevent women's exposure to further violence. And it is undermining women's basic human rights to a safe home and the right to equal and reliable treatment by our justice system. And of course, this also applies to the rights, safety and well-being of thousands and thousands of children who are exposed to domestic violence in their homes, in communities across Ireland. I just want to focus a little bit more in terms of what we mean by a right to the safe home and how it's not being met. So we're just in the middle of a piece of research across the country with all of our member services looking at the issue of homelessness, because we have the most critical situation in Ireland for refuge provision and addressing women's homeless needs in relation to domestic violence in the history of our movement. What we found in the study is that the issues that are being raised in Dublin and in Cork and in Galway were also being raised in Castlebar, in Donegal, in West Cork, right across the country. I'll even name Killaloe, County Clare, where I was born. Women and children are staying in refuges for many months. This is absolutely unacceptable. Domestic violence is not on the homeless agenda. The Department of Environment are not making any visible, proactive efforts to look at domestic violence and homelessness in the same sentence and the same reality for the women and children coming forward. Women cannot find safe places to live in with their children. Women come to refuge as a last resort. They have tried everything to find safety. Refuge is a wonderful place to work with women in terms of safety and move-on options to a safe, freer life. However, it is not a place to have to live and share communal living for months, and in now cases over 12 months and up to 18 months in some situations. We have children, as Sharon has referred to, have been born into refuge, who are leaving school every day to go to refuge, who spent Christmas in refuge with other families under the same Christmas tree. And as a result of our limited capacity to provide emergency situation or a refuge, to move women on to more suitable, safe accommodation, significant numbers of women have no other choice, but to choose to return to live with their abusers. What we are seeing in the research is that all of the issues that are presented in the general debate on homelessness, so access to housing, the high rents, the housing assistance payment not being enough to meet the rents, all of that apply equally to women who are homeless because of domestic violence. But here's the added extra. Women who are homeless are often leaving a home where they're tied to a tenancy, a mortgage, or the ownership of the house. And while the remainder of our state system is failing to protect her to stay in that home, she cannot return. But she's now not eligible in many instances to access the social welfare supports that should be available to her. But I realised when we were reading this report, when it had come through to us, that, and we had been working with Chris Sullivan on work in the US, I realised that actually we have fooled ourselves into believing that we're in a welfare state, because we're not. Because what we're doing is we're pushing women into a system if they're not already in it, and we're trying to work with them in a system to make it fit to accommodate them. But the welfare that is there is not matching the needs that they have to get immediate, safe accommodation and provide a stable home for them and their children. We've been here 12 months ago talking about the state we were in relation to our legal system. We launched the lawlessness of the home, and it followed the previous law, the launch of the Guard Inspector's report. We have spent the last year in quite a productive and insightful piece of research, which Conor is going to get into the detail of, moving out from just speaking with women, talking to justice professionals, working with the justice agencies, but also listening to more women. And what we're hearing is that our legal system at every level is continuing to fail women and children. Allegations of domestic violence are not always being investigated, but I will qualify that with the welcome work that's being done at the moment to address this within the Guards, so we have hope. However, I am talking today, I'm talking yesterday, I'm talking 6 months ago. This is still a reality. We're also hearing that the law continues to be applied differently across the country, interpreted differently. And this inconsistency is rooted, we believe, in two key things. One is capacity and understanding, and the basic familiarity about what the law is and what it means. And the second is the culture from which we operate from, the biases we hold when we respond to a woman who is a victim of domestic violence. When we are influenced by the myths and the belief systems that she is to blame, that she is somehow responsible for the crimes that are committed to her, and that she has all of the resources herself to free herself from this violence. And we cannot ignore gender bias and how this country as a whole has forgotten about the core principles in the proclamation about treating all of our citizens, men and women, equally. And finally, in our work, what we're seeing with the Guard practice is that, again, it's inconsistent. So we have great policies being developed, great reviews, and in our more recent research we're seeing that, you know what, there are great guards and they're right around the country, and they are learning more and more about the complexities of what they're responding to. But what we also hear, and you will see it in the research, the European research, is the devastation of when that first response and that follow-up response does not meet the reality of the horrendous crimes that are being committed against these women. Not once-off crimes, not monthly crimes, but crimes that are happening on a daily basis in the lives of the 40 women who we met. 40 women, you might say, it's not the whole country. 40 women, I say, one woman is too many. So Sharon has touched on some of the welcome developments that we are monitoring effectively and working with since 2014. And we're delighted that TUSLA has progressed to establish a national unit on domestic and sexual violence, and we continue to work with TUSLA to bring our collective learning to the table to try to problem solve the issues that are at hand. But we are very clear that a significant investment in resources is needed here, or we will go nowhere fast. We've seen more political leadership in the last 2 years, and I have to qualify this with the previous 20 years, when domestic violence was not an issue named by any politician in previous administrations. And we have to commend, and I commend, and the organisation commends the work of the elected politicians in the previous government, including TDs and senators, who did name domestic violence, who increased the parliamentary debates on domestic violence, who held the first joint Oireachtas committee debate and hearings on domestic violence, and who began to progress legislation that would actually start to make a difference on the ground for women and children who are living and looking for safety from domestic violence. I've talked about the police reform, but I particularly want to acknowledge that what this reform means is that there is plans for better, basic but important intelligence gathering and investigation, risk assessment, risk management. And these plans aren't just sitting in some shelf somewhere, they have got real targets behind them and they've got real people behind them driving them on the ground. We also very much welcome the opening of the victim services support offices right around the country, and I see Inspector Stack here who's led out from that in the force, and we commend them. They're a very welcome development, and we will look forward to working as these services develop. We have new legislation on the Child Family Relationship Act, which has been passed, which some of it has been commenced, but we don't yet fully understand how beneficial this will be on the ground, so this is work to monitor. We commend the Department of Justice and the politicians for progressing the legislation on the Victims of Crime Bill and for progressing legislation on the Domestic Violence Bill. These are critical pieces that need further work before they're passed in the new government when it is formed. I think it's tomorrow it's formed, actually. I heard there recently. We also want to acknowledge the new government strategy, and particularly to acknowledge its action plan to move us towards the ratification of Istanbul, and to highlight again within that the work of the court services and TUSLA and the police, because these are important actions that are very real and achievable now. But this strategy has significant gaps. And the significant gaps are so obvious across the roles of the Department of Environment, of Health and of Education particularly. So we're delighted that the Minister signed it as a living document and it has scope to be developed in the coming years. And we look forward to working with CUSC and other agencies to do that. And finally, in terms of welcome developments, we haven't been sitting back doing nothing ourselves. So Safe Ireland has progressed a very important emerging body of research. We're progressing very important campaigns, awareness-raising campaigns that are focused on trying to change the culture with which we live in, and focused on looking to engage men and women as active voices to end and change the visibility of domestic violence in Ireland. And we're delighted that we've launched a new strategy, a 5-year plan, in which we're very clear it is possible, with the country we live in and the collective resources we have and the size that we are, to pool our heads together so that we can become the safest country in the world for women and children to live in. And with that, we are delighted to have been working with the Community Foundation of Ireland, who have taken leadership as an agency to stand with us and to invest in us over the next 5 years, and to work to increase investment for us to help realise these plans. I want to now pause to talk to all of you who have any influence on any politicians who are not here, and those of you who are elected who are here. Again, you're welcome. We have a critical critical opportunity, no matter what party you're elected from or that you weren't elected into, in the next few weeks, to influence the programme for government. And as Sharon referred to, we are not hearing this issue named, and we continue to ask why, but we're not hearing it named. I would love to have the roads fixed and work better in West Sligo where I work, but I would prefer that I was growing up in a community where I knew, and I know and I'm confident that my two daughters would be safe to live in as they grow and learn. And this is why this issue, for me and for us as an organisation in the whole, is critical. We cannot stop and wait for another programme of government or wait to push out our plans. The time is now. The violence is happening now. We need to work together to end it. We're asking for resources, and you know what? We really aren't asking for that much, because in the scheme of the resources that are going into the country and in the scheme of what's costing this country in terms of domestic violence, an investment from 2017 of €30 million across state and non-state agencies to do key service development and prevention work is not a big ask. And we're asking you as politicians to get this on the agenda. We're asking for your leadership in the first 100 days. Your leadership is critical. We've learned from the last administration that the coordination of the government response is critical to ensuring that all departments are working in a coordinated manner under a lead department instructing same. So we're not losing time waiting for one department to agree to talk to another department before they start to push the paper down the track. We have to support the agencies that are there, but we need the Minister with lead responsibility for domestic violence to have the authority to act across all departments, including an equal standing with the Public Expenditure Department. Our acting, current, former and now Taoiseach Enda Kenny committed as a Cabinet Subcommittee on Domestic Violence to us in the last government. This has been presented as fitting under the Cabinet Subcommittee on Social Policy. However, this hasn't worked in 7 years, because we know in 7 years of this issue sitting on this Cabinet table that the agenda item was, as we understand, once. I can be corrected on that, but if it was more than once, it was twice. We need a dedicated committee on this to take what is one of the biggest social problems that we're dealing with. As Sharon said, at the root of all violence is what happens in the home. We need to get a grip with domestic violence, and we need a Cabinet committee to prioritise this with a Minister with lead responsibility, and that cross parties, where there is agreement that this is an issue, that they're working together to resolve it. And we want you to work with us to drive our vision to achieve the country that will be the greatest country to live in, because it's the safest country to live in. The bills are there, the legislation is there. I'm not going to go into too much detail in terms of time, but there are bills that we need to work with, they need to be improved, but they also need to be progressed. And Caroline's going to talk more about the Victims of Crime Directive. And finally, if there's anybody in this room with authority, if you could go back to your desk when you leave and look at how we can waive the free legal aid charge for domestic violence victims immediately, because they're not even getting access to legal aid if they don't have the resources. There is a discretionary function there, but it's not understood across legal aid across the country. So women are not getting access to the most basic entitlements, free legal aid. We want anybody with influence in the Department of Environment to ensure, as a matter of urgency, that regardless of a woman's income or status, when she needs emergency accommodation, that we are looking at a protocol that gets her into an available home with the money available immediately. Then we can work on what system she fits into. But can we please get her accommodated and her children accommodated so she's not going back to violence? And finally, immediately, and this blows my mind, we have this piece of legislation, or not legislation, it's a policy in the Department of Environment that's in the local authorities, where they're applying a centre of interest criteria. The centre of interest is the place that you are now living in. If you are a victim of domestic violence, the place you're now living in does not mean that you have a centre of interest there. It means you're there because you need to be there because it's not safe to be where you're from. But this piece of policy was introduced to stop people moving from one local authority to another. Please make an exemption for women who are experiencing domestic violence. It's just about signing a piece of directive in the Department of Environment and educating the local authorities. And it should happen tomorrow, no delays. Apologies if I'm getting over-passionate, but I am. And I was absolutely privileged with my colleagues and with our network members right across the country, and many of you here, to join with our most wonderful President, Michael D. Higgins, in the Oris on the 11th of March, where he brought together the Man Up campaign and the He for She campaign, and he's making domestic violence and gender-based violence a key issue for his the remainder of the term of his presidency. What he says, and what he's right about, and I don't disagree with him, is that all of society loses when you have gender inequality. All of society is flawed if gender violence is allowed to occur, is tolerated, and if an intolerable silence prevails around this grave issue. Then too, he says, we should make no invocation of cultural differences or tradition to accept or make excuses for this violence. So we'll be delighted to be working with the President's Office and many of the large civil society organisations who have engaged with us in recent months to progress this culture change agenda. I'd like to finish by saying you have copies of the report. Please share wide and far, and they're available online. I'm now going to hand you over to Anne. Thank you very much.